Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. I'm so glad you can join me today. As you can see, I'm still trying to figure out my set, so I moved to a new spot. We'll see if it works out. It's a rainy, dreary day today. I'm working with lighting. Lighting right now is my biggest struggle with this, so please just hang in there with me. So today we're going to look at another vintage quilt, and this one is made up of hexes or hexagons. This quilt is completely done by hand, 100%. So it would be a great winter project, something that could inspire you. It is about 60 by 80, the size of it, so it's a nice size quilt. It's a coverlet. It's still a quilt because it's pieced, it's sandwiched, it is quilted because the pieces are held together. However, it doesn't have any batting inside. So it's not a quilt that's going to keep you completely warm. Just like last week we looked at a quilt like that. Let's see what we can learn from this maker. Okay, and taking a closer look at this quilt, we can see the pops of color here with the blue, which really do give that cohesive look to the entire quilt, because we have all these pastels, which are wonderful, but then when you bring in this pop of color, it kind of just really draws your eyes to the contrast, and it's a really nice effect with this. So let's first talk about the construction. This is a hexie. These are all hexes. They are hand stitched together. So to take a look at one of the hexes here, so you can see it, is right here. Each hexie measures across about a little less than 5 inches, and then each side is 3 inches. So if we look at it, it's 3 inches. There is hand quilting on this, holding the pieces together. The hand quilting is more, you'll be able to see it better on the back side of this quilt. So like I said, these are pieced together by hand. The entire quilt is made by hand. So let's take a look at the back of the quilt. So in looking at the back of this quilt, you can see more of these solid fabrics, and there's not just the blue. Now we have black and green, and there's pinks, and there's other colors in here that do pull it all together, but there are much brighter blocks as well. The quilting goes almost through the middle of these blocks, which must have been really difficult to line up, making sure that your front and your back were in the same spot. So that must have been tricky for the quilt maker to do. You can see some of these really cool fabrics. We got like a bandana print. There's definitely some 1930s, 1940s prints in here. There's paisleys and purples that have texture, and black and white, and just some really cool prints. One of the coolest prints though, I think, is this one over here. I mean, how cute is that, with flowers and the bows? And you can see that the blue is the exact color as our focus fabric, our focus solid. Here, it's the exact color, so it really brings it together nicely and gives a nice cohesive feel. The binding was attached all by hand and is a completely separate piece of fabric. This person stitched it onto one side and then pulled it to the back and hand stitched it down. And the corners are not mitered, but they're absolutely beautifully done. The quilt, the condition of the quilt is in fantastic shape. There are no tears or holes or anything like that. I don't know where I got this quilt. I wish I did. I don't spend more than like $40 on a quilt, or I haven't yet. Maybe someday I will. And usually these quilts, for whatever reason, vintage quilts seem to find me. I'm lucky that way. That's my only superpower, I think. So what lessons can we take away from this quilt? The first lesson that I think is very important is the way that this quilt maker ended and started the different hexagons. This quilt maker did not worry about leaving a full hexagon at the ends or at the beginnings of her rows or his rows. So we see that. That's really cool. Next lesson, you can make a whole quilt completely by hand. You do not need a sewing machine to make a quilt. And I know that we know this as quilt makers, like this is, you know that because you see the quilting bees, you see like anytime anybody who doesn't quilt and you tell them that you quilt, they think you're, in like a group of old ladies who's sitting around doing everything by hand. And, we get these ideas in our heads, but Once you become a maker, you rely on that machine. And I think it's important as makers to realize we can always go back and really understand the structure of a quilt by doing it by hand. Having made a quilt by hand, completely by hand, you will learn the structure and the anatomy of a quilt so much better when you slow down and actually take the time to do it by hand. So I encourage you to do that, even though I know it's a daunting task. Maybe just a table runner or a placemat or something like that, but try it, it's worth it. Another lesson I believe this maker is telling us through this quilt is to pick a focus fabric and work around it. It doesn't have to be in an orderly way, but having that focus fabric that is something that ties it all together really does help the overall look of the quilt. And it really does make your eye almost calm as you look at it, especially with scrap quilts, because this is a very cohesive quilt. Even though it is scrappy and there's a lot of different fabrics, there is a cohesiveness about it because of that blue fabric. I'm so happy that you joined me today. Please, please subscribe. It really helps me. And you know, who knows what my set will look like next week. I'll see you next week when we look at yet another antique quilt. See you then. Bye.